Shouldn't Saudi Arabia have a better strategy if they really want to cut a deal?
Well, they should perhaps have a better strategy, but I'm not sure they really wanted to cut the deal. I think they wanted to really show who's boss. They have very, very large cash reserves, cost close to about $700 billion today altogether, and they just want to show that they can control OPEC, and they can want to tell Iran that Iran has to abide by their rule, and of course Iran is not willing whatsoever to do that. And the Saudis are perfectly happy to keep the problem going for Iran until Iran gives up, which in my opinion may not ever happen.
And well, let me ask Mr. Livingston to jump in here. How much of this has to do with the containment of Iran from the Saudi Arabia side?
I would agree with Jean-François, but I would add that it's not only about Iran, but it's just about pushing high-cost production out of the market in general. And the Saudis in November 14 at the OPEC meeting there led OPEC into a new strategy of fighting for market share, even the expense of stability in oil prices. They knew it was going to be costly. Since then, the producers that were at the Doha summit have lost somewhere on the order of 300 to 320 billion in net foreign reserves as oil prices have dropped. And so they've incurred significant costs. But to give up on that at the moment, when shale production and non-OPEC production has been surprisingly resilient thus far, would probably be a mistake for Saudi Arabia. They're going to wait it out a little bit longer. The IEA is now predicting that non-OPEC production from the fourth quarter of 2015 to the fourth quarter of this year will fall by over 1 million barrels a day, when only a year ago they were predicting that it would increase by 500,000 over that same period. So Saudi's starting to see signs that the strategy is working, and the rundown in net foreign reserves is just a down payment on the creation of future space for market share for low cost oil producers such as Saudi Arabia.
Let the market do its job, and the OPEC countries should leave it be. Do you agree with that?
Well, actually, that's the whole world expectation that the market work out, but the market simply is failing in the intervention of OPEC by the traditional way of manipulating this market, and now they have really changed their strategy by strengthening on their market share. Of course, the giant will believe that they're going to win out, and also there is a global strategy try to stamp out the new energy strategy, because that with the lower oil price and the sort of renewable energies cost will be higher, and so therefore they can still maintain a leadership in the world energy market.
I want to ask all three of you your future prediction of oil price, but before that I want to show our viewers how we got here today. Let's take a look back at the price fluctuation of Brent oil dated back from early 2014. In June, the price of Brent oil hiked up to $115 per barrel and then started to plummet. 7 months later, in January 2015, the price dropped to $46 per barrel. And then the coming months only saw it going down even further. Now, Brent oil hit a 12-year low, $27 per barrel in January 2016. But the last couple of months witnessed a slight recovery of oil price. In April 2016, it reached $44 per barrel. Again, Professor Seznec, with the recent recovery, some believe that it is springtime for oil market. Others remain conservative. What's your take on the future oil price? Will the current momentum be sustained?
Well, until the Doha agreement, I was sort of agreeing with this, but now that Saudi Arabia has really vetoed any kind of arrangement, I don't think there will be any increase in prices. I think the Russians have already announced they will try to increase production if they can. So that the market will react very negatively to this. Now, surprisingly enough, for the past 2 days, it's gone up because, in great part, because there's a strike in Kuwait that's taking quite a number of barrels of the market, but that's going to be very short-lived. And I think that we could see a further decline back to maybe 30 very shortly. just to wait for Saudi Arabia pushing to force the other members of OPEC and Russia, of course, which in many ways is even more their targets than Iran, to give in and agree to a full freeze and maybe even a small cut.
So a decline in the short term. Mr. Livingston, do you agree with that?
I do. It's important to remember that a lot of these countries aren't only running deficits in their budget anymore, but they're running deficits of trust and credibility. From the Saudi perspective, back in 2001, there was another agreement by Saudi Arabia, Russia, Norway, Mexico, and a number of other producers to cut production actually by 500,000 barrels per day. And yet by the end of the next year, only Mexico and Norway had actually cut, and Russia had increased production by 300,000 barrels per day. So there are very few precedents to go on in which we get a production freeze or a production cut agreement that's actually held to. And part of the problem there is just the difficulty in monitoring and enforcing these sorts of agreements. So until there's more trust, and obviously the collapse of the Doha oil talks, when many expected them to at least come out with some sort of symbolic face-saving agreement, doesn't provide any extra credibility.
Professor Liu?
Well, to discuss about the price trend, you really consider those fundamentals: supply, demand, and inventory level, and also substitute products that might be available. So right now, the supply is difficult really to cut down, and plus there are new discoveries in the Mexican region, and also now in the Tehran Basin. So people will believe, the market sentiment will be there will be a glut of oil anyway. And on the other, so the inventory level is still very high if you take it on a global horizon. The demand is not really there to match the sort of increase in the supply, because the people are more, major economies are shifting more onto the service sector, so the oil reliance is getting less. And there might be a possibility that when people overcut their supply, for example, Canada really cut down 62% of their production for the mega projects. They have delayed to no definite date. So the overreaction might really lead to a certain rebound, but the general trend, people would believe that it is there to stay in the corridor of $30 to $40.
And the technology of shale, has practically changed the oil relationship between U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The days of almost total U.S. dependency on Saudi oil for energy needs seems to, likely gone. And thanks to that domestic production, including that shale technology, Professor Seznec, how do you think the relationship between Saudi and U.S. especially it will go on, especially when now ties between the two countries are not as close as before?
Well, yes, I agree that the ties are very frosty at this point, but they're still very necessary, so I think they'll go along with that. But in terms of the shale, I think there is a possibility of a happy compromise just between the shale producers of the United States and Saudi Arabia. If the Saudis and the shale producers had a price at $60 a barrel, both would be happy. The shale producers here could make some money, and the Saudis would lessen their losses quite substantially. But it still would hurt Iran and Russia. So I think we could see some effort to cooperate at some levels to maybe see the prices go back up to 60, although I think this will not happen easily, but I think the two countries could work closely on these matters. The U.S. still net imports over 5 million barrels a day, so it is not totally independent from the world market. It's very much independent from the Gulf region, but the price is worldwide, and that still matters to the U.S.
Well, what's also at play here is the split between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It runs deep with sectarian disputes. And earlier, since Iran's oil export was restricted by international sanctions. Saudi Arabia was the largest and most influential member of OPEC. Mr. Livingston, with Iran now back in game, how will this participation going to affect Saudi Arabia's status in OPEC, do you think?
Well, clearly you see Saudi Arabia pushing back. They don't want to accommodate Iran, at least not without extracting significant concessions, either in oil policy or in other policy areas. Iran wants to return to its pre-sanctions levels of 4 million barrels per day. That will be slow coming. The consensus seems to be that they'll add somewhere around 500 to 700,000 barrels per day by the end of this year. I don't see this contributing to any cohesiveness in OPEC for the time being. But if I can make a quick comment as well on the issue of oil inventories, I think there's an interesting phenomena here structurally in the oil market that people need to pay attention to, which is the fact that since this market share strategy has been pursued by Saudi Arabia and others, it means that Saudi Arabia is producing at near record levels. What that's also done is it's reduced the spare capacity that Saudi Arabia has held, which has traditionally acted like a buffer in the oil market in times of scarcity or when there have been unexpected supply shocks with supply being taken offline. So instead, what's happening is spare capacity is below ground is being taken out of the market as Saudi Arabia is pumping more, and that's being replaced to some degree by spare capacity represented by the large amount of oil in storage that we have today. It doesn't act the same way. It's not subject to the same centralized decision-making process, but there is an interesting transformation from one form of spare capacity in the market to another form, and that will have implications for how the oil market behaves over time going forward.
All right, lastly, Professor Liu, I want to also bring Russia into the picture. And now, Russia, it seems like it's reported that they have no intention to scale back on its production, and that is a new power exerting influence in the Middle East. Another major oil supplier, it is coordinating oil price with Saudi Arabia. And it seems like with U.S. withdrawing its involvement from the Middle East, Russia is keen on filling that power vacuum. So how do you see this going forward?
Well, for Russia, I do not think they can really even afford to cut down on their production. And right now, Russia is trying to assume or pitch the gap of in the absence of leadership. But to play a leadership, you need to number one, you need to have the rule-making power. Yes, they are still military strong, and also they supply a lot of more military stuff to Saudi Arabia. They need more than that. They need you need the economic might to assume your leadership, and they're also diversifying their market and now penetrating more into the Asia market. So everyone is trying to seek the favor of the major economies, while they wanted to maintain a sort of a moral leadership. So far, I do not think that Russia can really replace the United States' influence in the Middle East.